The galaxy had never seen a crisis like this. In the farthest reaches of space on a distant planet called Koval, the skies had turned red with the flames of war. The Alliance of United Civilizations, made up of multiple advanced alien species, had been fighting a ruthless enemy known as the Balskar Dominion. The Balskar were a terrifying force, known for their advanced technology and brutal tactics. No matter how hard the Alliance fought, it seemed that the Balskar's power was unyielding. The leaders of the Alliance had tried everything. They had used diplomacy, they had formed alliances with nearby star systems, and they had even hired mercenaries to fight on their behalf. But nothing worked. The Balskar grew stronger by the day, and the once thriving civilizations of Koval were now falling one by one. The people were terrified. They cried out to the stars, hoping that anyone could come to their rescue. Then, in their darkest hour, they sent a message. It was a call for help, broadcasted across the galaxy, hoping to reach the one planet that had the strength to save them. Earth. "We need angels," the message said. "We need warriors who can defeat the Balskar. We need saviors." For weeks they waited, their hopes hanging by a thread. What they didn't know was that Earth had a very different idea of what a savior was. On Earth, there was no such thing as an angel. The humans who responded to the call were not peaceful diplomatic figures. They were warriors. Ruthless, skilled, and ready for battle. The response came from a group known as the Earth Defense Corps, EDC, a division of soldiers specially trained for combat in hostile environments. These soldiers were feared across their world for their intense training, their disregard for personal safety, and their unshakable loyalty to their mission. They were trained to survive in the harshest of conditions and fight until the very end, no matter the cost. And they were ready. The fleet of ships that arrived on Koval was unlike any the aliens had ever seen. The ships were sleek, built for speed and efficiency, and they carried with them an army of humans, each one as fierce and determined as the next. The first ship that landed on Koval's soil was led by Captain Elias Rook, a man known across Earth as the ultimate soldier. Rook was tall and imposing, his face weathered by years of combat. His eyes were cold, but his presence commanded respect. He was a man who knew war, and he had come to Koval to win. When Captain Rook and his troops disembarked from their ships, they were met by the alien leaders who had sent the distress signal. The leaders, a coalition of Koval's surviving civilizations, stood together in a large chamber at the landing site, watching with a mix of hope and fear. They had begged for angels, but now as they looked at the human soldiers before them, they weren't so sure they had received what they asked for. The humans marched in perfect formation, their steps synchronized and their faces unreadable. The alien leaders had expected peacekeepers, diplomats, heroes who would fight with honor and uphold the values of the galaxy. What they saw before them were warriors whose very presence radiated danger. The first to speak was Alara, the chief diplomat of the Koval Council. She stepped forward, her posture regal yet filled with uncertainty. She had been the one to send the call for help. But now that she saw the soldiers of Earth up close, she felt a flicker of doubt. "You came," she said, her voice steady but laced with caution. "But we asked for angels, not soldiers." Captain Rook's gaze hardened as he stepped forward to answer. His voice was deep, unwavering, as he spoke to the council. "You asked for help. We came. We're here to fight, and to win. That's all you need to know." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. They had hoped for saviors who would inspire hope and peace, not warriors who seemed to thirst for battle. "The Balskar have been relentless," Alara continued, her voice pleading. "We need to stop them before they destroy everything we've built. But we need more than soldiers. We need those who can bring hope, who can protect our people." Rook's eyes flickered for a moment. There was something in Alara's words that stirred something within him. Perhaps it was the desperation in her tone or the sadness in her eyes. But he quickly shook off the feeling. There was no time for pity in this war. "You'll have your victory," Rook said coldly. "But it will come at a cost. We do not fight for peace. We fight to win. Alara didn't know how to respond to him. She had heard of the humans' reputation, but she had never encountered them before. They were not what she had imagined. The humans were wild, unpolished, and their presence seemed to hang in the air like a storm cloud. There was something brutal about them, something that made her question whether the Balskar were truly the only threat to Koval. As the days passed, the humans settled into their new base of operations. They were not interested in making friends or earning the trust of the Koval leaders. They had a mission and they intended to complete it. Their training was rigorous and they didn't waste time on pleasantries. The alien soldiers and civilians watched as the humans began to prepare for battle, not with strategy or diplomacy, but with raw force. The humans were efficient, their combat techniques honed to perfection. But what shocked the Koval people most was their sheer lack of empathy. Where the alien soldiers would hesitate, trying to minimize harm to civilian populations, the humans showed no such restraint. They trained to be ruthless, to eliminate their enemies with precision. They saw war as a game, a challenge to be won at all costs. The alien soldiers, though still grateful for the humans' power, began to wonder if they had made the right choice in calling for help. Captain Rook held a meeting with his officers. He had studied the Balskar Dominion and knew their tactics better than anyone. The Balskar were fierce, yes, but they were also vulnerable in key areas. The humans, with their unmatched combat prowess, were the perfect force to counter them. Rook's strategy was simple: attack, overwhelm the enemy with sheer force and take no prisoners. "What we do here is not about honor," Rook said to his team. "It's about winning. We take them out or they take us out. No mercy. No second chances." The human soldiers nodded in agreement, their faces cold and ready. They knew what was at stake, and they had no intention of losing. Meanwhile, the Koval leaders gathered in their council chambers discussing what they had witnessed. Alara spoke again, her tone softer now, filled with doubt. "Are we sure this is the help we needed?" she asked. "These humans are different. They are not what we expected." One of the other leaders, a tall alien named Therok, nodded. "I understand your concerns, Alara, but they are powerful and we need that power. The Balskar have already destroyed too much. If the humans can defeat them, we may have a chance to rebuild." But Alara was not convinced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had invited something dangerous into their world, something they would not be able to control. As the humans prepared for their first major assault on the Balskar, the tension between the two sides grew. The aliens didn't know if they had made a grave mistake by calling for help, or if they had found their true salvation. The Balskar were coming, and the humans were ready. But Alara couldn't help but wonder if the angels they had called for would, in the end, be their downfall. The day had come. The humans were ready for their first real battle on Koval. Captain Elias Rook stood at the front of his forces, watching the skies darken as the Balskar fleet arrived. Their ships were massive, designed for destruction, and they came in waves, ready to crush everything in their path. The Koval people, once hopeful, were now watching with growing fear. The alien soldiers who had trained for years were anxious. They had fought the Balskar before, but they had never seen anything like the Earth soldiers. They were brutal, but they were also incredibly skilled. The humans had a different way of fighting, faster, more direct, and more violent. "Get ready," Captain Rook said to his men, his voice steady as always. "This is what we came here for. We take the Balskar down or they take us down." His words echoed in the minds of the soldiers, but their faces showed no fear. They were trained for this. They were trained to win. As the Balskar ships descended, the humans wasted no time. They had already deployed their forces across the battlefield, ready for the chaos that was about to unfold. They didn't wait for a strategic attack. They were the storm, and they would bring the fight to the enemy. The Koval soldiers, although skilled, stood back, uncertain whether they should fight alongside the humans or stay out of the way. The battle began with a deafening roar as the human forces fired their weapons, launching missiles and laser blasts, into the Balskar ships. The sky lit up with explosions and the ground shook beneath their feet. The human soldiers didn't hesitate. They ran into the fray, their weapons blazing, their hearts beating with a single goal: destroy the Balskar. The Koval soldiers standing on the sidelines watched in awe. They had never seen such speed and precision. The humans moved like machines, their tactics simple but effective. They didn't take cover or wait for the perfect shot. Instead, they charged forward, guns raised, cutting through the Balskar forces, with cold efficiency. The Balskar, caught off guard by the sudden assault, struggled to keep up with the humans' speed and ruthlessness. They had expected a well-organized, coordinated defense, but what they got was a chaotic, relentless onslaught. Rook, at the head of his squad, fired his weapon with deadly precision, taking down. The aftermath of the battle left Koval in a state of uncertainty. The skies, once filled with the smoke of war, had finally cleared, but the scars left on the planet were deep. In the days following the victory over the Balskar, the humans stood, tall, their mission completed. However, there was no joy in the air. The alien civilizations that had once celebrated the arrival of their angels now began to look at the humans with suspicion. Captain Elias Rook and his soldiers were prepared for the next stage of the conflict. The Balskar had been pushed back, but the fight wasn't over. They knew that a counterattack could come at any time. Rook's team had seen it before. Wars didn't end with a single victory. They were endless cycles of fight, survive, and conquer. He had no time for celebrations or looking back at what had been destroyed. For him, the mission was always the same: protect Earth's interests and eliminate any threat that came their way. But for Alara, the Koval diplomat, the world felt different. She stood at the edge of a large balcony overlooking the city. Once, vibrant and alive, now a quiet, burned-out shell. The battle had been won, yes, but it had come at such a cost. The humans had proven their strength, but they had also shown the world something else: their cold, relentless nature. She couldn't shake the feeling that these soldiers were not the saviors they had hoped for. They were something more dangerous. And now, as she observed the ruined city below, she began to wonder whether they had made a grave mistake in summoning them. She had spent countless hours talking to the Koval leaders, trying to make sense of what had happened. The humans had done their job. They had defeated the Balskar, and they had done it swiftly and decisively. But the Koval people were divided. Some were grateful for the victory, while others felt that the cost had been far too high. Alara's doubts grew with each passing day. She had trusted the humans, believing that they were the key to the Alliance's survival, but now she was unsure. What good was victory if the planet was left in ruins? What did it mean to win if the very foundation of Koval civilization had been shattered? Alara met with the other leaders of the Koval Council in a private room, deep within their underground base. The room was dimly lit and the air was thick with tension. Each of them wore an expression of uncertainty. The victory over the Balskar should have been a cause for celebration, but it had brought nothing but doubt. "We cannot ignore the reality of the situation any longer," Alara began, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Yes, we have won, but look at the cost. The humans have left nothing but destruction in their wake. The cities are ruined, the environment is damaged, and the civilians are terrified. They do not fight like us. They fight like demons." The others were quiet, listening closely. They had seen the same things Alara had seen: the destruction, the chaos, the disregard for life. But they also knew that the Balskar threat had been much worse. Without the humans, Koval might have already fallen. "The humans are powerful," said Tharok, a tall and strong member of the council. "But they do not fight with honor. They fight to win, and they have done that. The Balskar are gone, and our people are safe." "But at what price?" Alara shot back. "What are we going to tell our people? That we brought in outsiders to save us, and in the process they tore apart everything we've worked for?" "We have to be realistic," said Kivra, another member of the council. "Without them we would have lost. The Balskar were crushing us. The humans are saving us even if their methods are harsh. But we cannot deny the fact that we are still Here, still alive. Alara felt the weight of the conversation pressing on her. She understood Kivra's words, but they didn't make her feel any better. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the humans were not the angels they had hoped for. They were warriors. No, soldiers, who didn't care about anything other than winning. They didn't care about the cost, about the lives lost, about the ruins they had left behind. How long will this last? Alara asked, her voice soft, almost resigned. How long before they begin to see us as nothing more than pawns in their game? How long before we become just another battlefield for their conquest? The council members were silent, each of them considering her words carefully. They had seen the humans fight with cold precision, but they had also seen the humanity beneath their armor. They had seen the pain in their eyes after each battle, the weariness that came with victory. The humans were not heartless machines, they were people. But what kind of people were they? What kind of future would they bring to Koval? As the meeting ended, Alara walked back to her quarters, her mind spinning with questions. She had been the one to call for help, to ask the humans to come to Koval's aid. But now she wasn't sure if she had made the right choice. She had invited them here, and they had saved her people, yes, but in doing so, they had left Koval in ruins. The planet was alive, but it was broken. Captain Rook had said that victory was the only thing that mattered. But for Alara, the question remained. At what cost? Later that night, Alara visited the human base. She had to speak with Captain Rook. She needed to understand the humans better, to see what made them tick. They were so different from the Kovali. People. The way they fought, the way they lived. It was all so foreign to her. And yet she couldn't deny their strength, their ability to survive against all odds. When she arrived at the human base, Rook was sitting alone in a small, dimly lit room going over the mission reports. The weight of his responsibilities seemed to hang on his shoulders like an invisible burden. He looked up as Alara entered, his face unreadable. "Captain," she began, her voice hesitant, "I need to understand. Why do you fight like this? Why do you fight without hesitation, without mercy?" Rook looked at her for a long moment, as if considering how to answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low and serious. "We fight because we have no choice," he said. "Back on Earth, war is all we've ever known. It's the only way we've survived. There's no room for mercy when your survival is on the line. You fight or you die. That's the reality we live in." Alara listened closely, trying to understand. "But don't you see? There's more to life than survival. You can't just fight and destroy everything in your path. There has to be a balance. A reason for what you're doing." Rook sighed, a rare moment of vulnerability in his voice. "Maybe you're right. But sometimes balance doesn't matter. Sometimes you do what you have to do to survive. And if that means destroying everything else, then that's what we'll do." Alara stared at him, her heart heavy. She didn't know if she could ever accept this view of the world. The humans were not the angels they had hoped for. They were something else, entirely something far more complicated. As Alara left the human base that night, she felt more confused than ever. She had asked for help, but now she wasn't sure what she had brought into her world. The humans had saved them, yes, but what would they demand in return? How long would it be before Koval was no longer a planet of hope, but a pawn in a game, played by the Earth Defense Corps? And most importantly, would the Koval people ever be able to recover from the cost of their saviors? Koval was a planet at a crossroads. The humans had arrived, fought, and won, but in the process, they had left the world scarred. Cities lay in ruins. The environment had been damaged by the intense battles, and the people of Koval, once full of hope, were now filled with uncertainty. The aliens had called for help, but the very soldiers they had hoped would save them had turned their world into a battlefield. In the aftermath of the victory, Koval's leaders were left to pick up the pieces. Alara, once hopeful and determined, now found herself weighed down by the consequences of her decision. She had trusted the humans to help her people, but what had they brought instead? A victory at the cost of nearly everything they had worked for. The humans had not come as saviors. They had come as warriors. Their presence had shifted the balance of power on Koval, but it had also created a new kind of war, one not fought just against the Balskar, but between the Koval people and the very saviors they had begged for. Captain Elias Rook knew that the battle wasn't truly over. The Balskar had been defeated for now, but other threats would come. There was always another war to fight. He could sense the growing tension between his men and the Koval people. The humans had fought hard and delivered victory, but they were beginning to feel like outsiders on this planet. They had accomplished their mission, but at what cost? Rook walked through the human base, his eyes scanning the faces of his soldiers. The war was over, but there was no relief in their expressions. They had won, but the victory had left a bitter taste in their mouths. The destruction they had caused weighed on them, even if they wouldn't admit it. They had done what they were trained to do: fight and win. But now, as they looked around the ruined city, they began to question the true meaning of their mission. Despite the victory, Rook knew that the real challenge had only just begun. Koval had been saved, but it was far from being restored. The humans had come here to fight, to win, but could they help rebuild? Could they make peace with the Koval people, who were growing more suspicious by the day? As the humans continued their operations preparing for the possibility of future battles, Alara met with the Koval Council again. She couldn't stop thinking about the damage the humans had caused, but she also couldn't. The war was far from over, but the tension in the air was thick with an uneasy silence. The Balskar had been driven off Koval's surface, but there were whispers across the planet that the true cost of the humans' arrival had yet to be fully understood. The city ruins, the devastated land, the people who had once lived peaceful lives now haunted by the scars of conflict. It was clear that this victory was more complicated than anyone had imagined. Captain Elias Rook stood with his back to the massive holographic map of Koval, analyzing the latest intelligence reports. His soldiers were ready, but it was hard to shake the feeling that the humans had already done enough. The Koval people had survived, but they had lost so much in the process. Rook knew that no matter how many Balskar forces they crushed, the EEI damage done to Koval's future couldn't be erased by any more victories. "Captain, the perimeter is secure," Sergeant Juno, his second-in-command, said as she approached. Her voice was calm but firm, a quality that made her one of the few people Rook trusted without question. "Good, but stay alert. The Balskar might be down, but I have a feeling they're not finished yet," Rook replied, his voice distant. It was true. The Balskar may have retreated for the moment, but they weren't a species that would stay defeated for long. Rook had dealt with them before, and their relentless nature was something he respected. They wouldn't give up easily. Meanwhile, Alara paced back and forth in the council chambers. It had been days since she last met with Captain Rook. The Koval leaders had held several meetings discussing how to move forward with their planet's recovery, but the question on everyone's mind was whether or not the humans would stay. They had saved Koval from the Balskar, but now the Koval people had to rebuild, and that meant they had to figure out what their future with the humans would look like. Alara had always believed that the Koval people could be stronger together, with allies who shared their values, but the humans had shown a different side, to themselves, one that didn't care for diplomacy, for rebuilding, for lasting peace. They were here to win, and once the job was done, they would leave. At least that's how it seemed. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Therak entered, his expression grim. "We've received word from the human command. They're planning one final push, a strike against any remaining Balskar forces, hidden in the mountains," Therak said, his voice heavy with concern. "They want us to join them in this last operation." Alara stood still, absorbing his words. The humans didn't waste time, and they were already preparing for the next phase of the war. She knew that they had little interest in peace. They were fixated on eradicating every threat. But now, after everything, was it right for her to push for an alliance with these warriors? Was there any real future with them, or had their destruction gone too far? "Do we have a choice?" she asked, her voice quiet. She already knew the answer. The humans were a force that couldn't be ignored, but this time it felt different. They weren't fighting for peace. They were fighting to wipe out the last remnants of their enemies. The question was, would Koval stand alongside them once more? Tharok hesitated before responding. They've made it clear they'll move forward with or without us, but I don't know if we can afford to sit this one out. If the Balskar are hiding in the mountains, we need to know if they have more forces. We can't risk another invasion. Alara sighed, looking out the window at the broken landscape. The planet, once full of life and color, now felt empty. The humans had given them victory, but it had cost them so much. Could Koval trust them again? Or would they always see the humans as nothing more than a destructive force? I'll speak to Captain Rook, Alara finally said, her decision made. We'll fight together, but I need to understand one thing. Why do the humans fight like this? Why destroy everything in their path just to win? Tharok nodded and left, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts. She knew that what she was about to ask might change everything. The humans had come to Koval as outsiders, soldiers who had never cared for peace, only for victory. But Alara couldn't help but wonder if there was more to them. Were they capable of understanding that true peace came from rebuilding, not just conquering? That evening, Alara met with Rook in the same quiet corner of the city where they had spoken before. This time, she wasn't afraid to ask the questions that had been weighing on her mind. "Captain," she began, her voice firm but not without a trace of vulnerability. "I need to understand something. Why do you fight this way? You fight to win, but it's as if you've forgotten what victory really means. Why destroy everything just to beat the enemy?" Rook stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Alara could feel the tension in the air, but she had to ask. She had to understand the humans' mindset before they went any further. "We fight because that's how we've always fought," Rook said, his voice low. "Back on Earth, survival is all that matters. Peace isn't a luxury we can afford. We've fought wars for as long as anyone can remember. We fight to survive, to protect our people. But we don't fight for glory, and we don't fight for honor. We fight because we have to. If we don't, we die." Alara listened carefully, absorbing his words. There was a raw honesty in Rook's voice that she hadn't expected. But even as she understood his reasoning, something inside her stirred with a deep sense of unease. The humans' brutal way of life had been forged through endless war. They had been trained to fight, to win at any cost. And while that had made them unstoppable on the battlefield, it had left them unable to see the value of anything beyond the fight. "That's not enough," Alara whispered. "You've won the war, Captain, but can you rebuild this planet? Can you help us heal the wounds you've left behind?" Rook's eyes softened, and for the first time, Alara saw a flicker of something human in him. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if the humans were more than just soldiers. Maybe, just maybe, they could become something more. "We'll help rebuild," Rook said, his voice quiet. "But we can't do it alone. We're not here to fix everything, we're here to fight. What happens after that is up to you." Alara didn't know if that was enough, but she also knew that they didn't have much of a choice. The final battle was coming, and the humans had made it clear that they would not stop until the Balskar were completely eradicated. She had to decide whether to trust them or not. The next morning, Alara stood before the council once more, ready to face the humans in battle one final time. The Koval people would stand side by side with the humans, not as allies but as a necessary partnership. It was the only way forward. There was no turning back. As the Koval forces prepared for the final assault on the Balskar's last stronghold, Alara felt a sense of finality in the air. The humans had given Koval victory, but what would they leave behind? A broken world or a chance to rebuild? With her decision made, Alara knew that Koval's future was uncertain. The humans had shown them strength, but at what cost? The final battle loomed, and with it the chance to determine what kind of future Koval would have. The final battle was upon them. The Balskar, though pushed back from Koval's surface, had not disappeared entirely. A hidden stronghold remained, in the mountains, where the last of their forces had retreated. The humans, led by Captain Elias Rook, had made it clear they would not rest until the Balskar threat was eradicated once and for all. But Alara couldn't shake the thought. What was the cost of this final victory? The Koval people, still struggling to rebuild their cities and heal from the wounds of war, now faced a new dilemma. Should they trust the humans once more? They had saved Koval from the Balskar, but they had left the planet in ruins. Their methods were brutal, and the trust between the two races had worn thin. The Koval leadership had spent countless days, in council, debating whether the humans could ever truly be an ally, or if their presence on Koval had simply been a means to an end, a temporary alliance forged out of necessity. Now, the question remained. Should Koval risk fighting alongside the humans again, knowing that once the battle was over, the humans would likely leave, leaving the Koval people to pick up the pieces of their broken world? Alara stood in front of the council once more. This time, the mood was heavier than ever before. The council, members once divided over the humans' role in the conflict, now looked at each other with quiet uncertainty. It was clear that the decision to fight alongside the humans was not one to be made lightly. But with the Balskar lurking in the mountains waiting for their moment to strike, the choice was simple: fight and take a chance, or sit back and wait for the enemy to attack. We've been given a gift. Tharok spoke first, his voice low. The humans have made Koval's survival possible. The Balskar are powerful, but we would not be here without them. We owe them something. The question is, what will we do with that gift? I'm not sure it's a gift, Alara replied, her voice tense. It's a necessity for them. The humans are warriors, yes, but they've shown us the cost of their help. They've torn through Koval with little care for what's left behind. And now they want us to follow them into another fight. Do we keep letting them lead us to war? Kivra, who had remained silent through much of the discussion, now spoke up. We have no choice. The Balskar cannot be allowed to remain. If we wait, if we hesitate, we will be crushed. The humans may fight differently from us,